Hello and welcome to another Frankly podcast. And as we are doing with each series, we are bringing you 4 bonus episodes with practitioners that work in the same field as I do, bringing you like the super top tip thing you need to have in your toolkit as a leader. So not only are you hearing from other leaders about their story of becoming a leader, but also at the end of these podcasts, we've got these 4 bonus episodes to give you something to stick in your toolkit that will make a difference today. So this episode, I am delighted to welcome my dear friend, Jane, by the way, who is master of many things, but she's here to talk to us about a very hot topic, which I will let her explain in a moment, and one that I know every leader I've ever worked with has a challenge around. And so this is one of those tools that we definitely need to see in people's toolkits. So welcome, Jane.
Hello, good, really good to be
Oh,
here.
it's so great to have you on. For people that don't know Jane, let me introduce her as she's asked me to introduce her. So I'm going to read this to make sure I get it right. So Jane is coach and facilitator. She helps leaders, managers and teams to navigate difficult conversations and build resilient relationships so that stress levels go down and people work better together. Who doesn't want more of that in their life?
Well, I think they do.
Jane, by way of helping warm up the introduction to people who don't know you, tell us a little bit about what you do now and what you love about it.
Well, as you've said already, I'm a coach and facilitator, and the thing that really kind of gets me leaping out of bed in the morning, my purpose, is really about a contribution to peace. And the way I see myself doing that is by helping people to communicate more effectively in those business environments. And what I mean by that is communicating with head and heart. So sharing their truth about what's important, what they need, and resolving differences in a way that doesn't wreck the relationship. I hear so many times that people are worried about, "Oh, if I say this or if I ask that, that somehow everything's going to come falling apart." And it's just not true. But the thing is, relationships affect everything, don't they? You can't get much done in life without a relationship with others. And when they're going well, actually, that makes us feel really good. And kind of that feeling of I can get anything done makes us feel good about ourselves. And when they're not going so well, actually, it has the exact opposite effect. And it can reduce our ability to think things through, to plan, to get stuff done. And actually, we start feeling really bad about ourselves as well. That's what I've seen and experienced in my own life. So that's really why I care about what I do, because I know it doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah, yeah. And so you work with managers, leaders, teams, and you do a lot of work around resilience. But one of your hot topics, because I know you have many, is how do you handle difficult conversations?
Absolutely. Because I care so much about relationship, and relationships have an enormous impact on our own personal resilience. And it's probably the one thing that people will say, I don't know how to handle it, or I don't want to, I'm frightened of upsetting things.
Mm.
And actually, we can have the conversations that matter. And what I haven't said about kind of how I got into this was I've always been interested in people. And even as a small child, I was kind of observing relationships. And I had spent a lot of time in the summer holidays with my 2 sets of grandparents, and the dynamics in those 2 households were very different. And I feel like this is where it all came from in the first place. One
Mm.
set of grandparents, very loving, warm, made friends wherever they went. My other set of grandparents had a more challenging, tense kind of relationship. And I got used to, I suppose, noticing what it's like in those different environments and noticing the unspoken as well as the spoken. And I think that just kind of switched me on to what's going on from about 4 or 5 years old. And then when I moved into corporate life, I mean, there's a brilliant opportunity there, isn't there, to see how people are in meetings, one-to-ones, and being part of that. And again, I was really noticing what was going on and things that weren't said and were said, and what happened as a result. And I know that one of my values when I first did that kind of exercise for myself in my early 20s was harmony and connection were both really important to me. And
Mm.
so I think the roots of all of this have really been around how can we have harmony and still have positive, effective relationships?
Yeah. And I love that. I love that you're kind of taking something that can feel very complex and tricky, sort of emotionally, because we're working with the relationship dynamics of being in a relationship of sorts in the workplace with others,
Mm.
and kind of going, it doesn't have to feel tricky. You can actually have peace in that tricky space. And I know we're going to come back and unpack this a little bit more in terms of tips for leaders, but let's just put this into the broader context. So thinking about like some of the biggest challenges of our future that leaders are facing, what do you think leaders can use these tools for, particularly to help them prepare for those big challenges?
I think you're absolutely essential. You think about all the change and challenge that's going on in the world right now. You don't need me to say climate crisis and political and economic changes that are happening, well, day by day sometimes at the moment. Technology and AI and people worrying about what's going to happen in terms of my own job. And
Mm.
all of those issues create a lot of uncertainty and fear. And I think the more we're in a realm of fear, the more we need to work together to navigate our way through kind of those choppy waters. Leaders often say it's lonely at the top. I think I've heard you say that on one of
Mm.
at least one of these
Yeah,
podcasts, or people have talked about
yeah,
that. And actually, they don't have to be on their own. If they are comfortable with developing the skills to handle difficult and challenging conversations alongside everything else, actually, more possibilities and ideas are opened up because you're willing to hear different thoughts and views from different people and not see it as a personal challenge, but actually have new perspectives, new ideas, and be open to kind of debating those. And what do we need now? We need bright, clear thinking, not getting lost in our own little worlds on our own and feeling fearful but not able to tackle the situations.
or avoiding things, which we see as well in this space quite a lot, don't we? Like, oh, that's going to cause a whole can of worms, so let's just tiptoe around it or avoid it and get on with something else that's easier.
Absolutely, yeah. Brushing it under the carpet, just leaving it there, and not dealing with it. And
Yeah.
and actually, what I've noticed is when people do have the kind of conversations that bring those things out into the open, whilst they might at first be afraid this is going to wreck a relationship, I can't possibly do that, where we won't be able to work together. When it happens and people do have those conversations, actually it increases the bonds, boosts the resilience of the relationship because people are being more real and
Yeah,
makes all the difference.
does make a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So that's, and we're kind of talking about the resource that you're bringing in this bonus episode, but let's like kind of narrow it down even more. So what's that resource that you think leaders need?
Well, in the work that I've done with leaders, what I notice is many of them are really good at that initial part of building relationship, building rapport and connection with people enough to get stuff done. And what they also need to go along with that is the courage and the conviction to be able to then handle the challenges and the difficulties, to take it further and to create a culture and an environment in their own workplace where it is welcome to say, actually, I don't understand, or I've got another perspective, I don't
Mm.
see why we're doing things this way, or to challenge unhelpful behaviours in other people that are hindering the work.
Mm.
And so often I hear that those are the things that get stepped over. It's easier, I've seen it in meetings where there's an issue, but actually let's focus on something else on the agenda because that's easier to deal with. And so the small fry stuff gets attended to, and the thing that really matters often gets parked and nobody actually attends to it. And if you as a leader are behaving that way, you're creating a culture where people just don't tackle what needs to be tackled. What we need is leaders who will role model how do we go about having those conversations, because then it enables people to do the kind of everyday stuff like, I don't know, holding somebody to account for their part in a project. Because if you're trying to get something done and somebody else hasn't played their part and it's hindering you, you need to be able to have the conversation. But I often hear people say, oh, I don't know how to, I don't want to upset them, those kind of things. We need to be able to give feedback on unhelpful behaviour,
Yeah.
unhelpful comments, unhelpful ways of doing things. Otherwise, those things just keep going. We need people to be able to say what they need. I don't know about you, but I often hear people say, "Oh, I better not ask for that. I can't
Yeah,
possibly put that on the
yeah,
table." And so then they can't quite really do what they need to do because they haven't asked for what they need in order to be able to deliver their part in a project. It's about getting things out in the open, a much wider, more open culture so that not just leaders, but their people can tackle these issues and they don't become something that gets bigger and bigger. They get
yeah,
nipped in the bud.
yeah. And I love all those examples, and I'm thinking of some others that pop up, like the one-to-ones in your team when you need to call someone out on performance. And also alongside that, the lovely, like for me, would be a lovely conversation, which is the developmental, the PDP, the kind of end of year review conversations where you're getting into development and growth and stretch for next year. I think that can bring up a lot of trickiness for leaders that they start to go, oh, this is going to go into a difficult conversation.
Yes, because they're often afraid of it might require them to give some feedback to somebody in order for them to see, yes, this is an area that needs development and I need to do something
Yeah.
about it. And they're so afraid of the delivery of the message that the person is left, well, not knowing that actually there are skills and behaviours that they could do with developing. So it doesn't really serve anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as if we haven't given people enough reason to really think, oh, I need to really, like, this is one of those areas that I can sharpen my sword, as it were, and get better at. Like, sum up, why do you think that this hot topic should matter to leaders today?
Well, throughout my whole working life, whether in corporate life or since I've been coaching and facilitating leaders and teams, it's been a recurring theme. I hear all the time people are afraid of what they think of as a difficult conversation, and it causes all sorts of problems. And the fact is, we need to be able to deal with differences because if we don't deal with them, difference in perspective and so on, they just fester and they cause more problems. So I would really encourage anybody who's listening to this to pause and think about how much time and energy they're wasting or is wasted in their organisation, stressing about and considering how do I or do I not have the conversation, and if I'm going to have it, what am I going to say and what will they say, all that kind of trying to work it out like a game of chess. Whereas actually being willing to step in with curiosity would be really helpful.
Mm.
I know from some research from the Chartered Management Institute that 66% of people feel stressed when they are thinking about having a conversation that they consider to feel difficult.
Mm.
And that's an enormous number of people. And think of the hours that are spent wasted actually when people are stressing and fretting on, what shall I do? How will I do it? How many of your colleagues are spending time right now wondering how to handle a particular what they're thinking of as a challenging situation? We need to be resourceful. We need to be capable. And when leaders and managers feel really capable at handling those kinds of conversations, actually the organization and everybody become stronger because things don't have a chance to get brushed under the carpet and fester.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think at the moment I would add to that like the complexity and uncertainty and incomprehensibility that we're living in on a macro scale at the moment is meaning that lots of organisations are kind of like locking down, and actually when it's tough out there in the context, that those feelings of anxiety and nervousness that exist in your people, and it will be circulating around in your culture, and things that aren't, like you mentioned, like elephant in the room at the beginning, like when you don't surface those things, they just cycle round on the surface level, don't they, kind of popping their head up as unhelpful behavior until someone goes, hang on, let's just acknowledge what is going on here. What is happening. And you want people to be at their best and to feel resourced and supported, particularly at the moment, given what's going on a world scale.
Yeah. And actually, when people are in that kind of state of fear, they tend to, the stories that they make up about what's going on and how to fix it are, well, fear based,
Yeah.
and they're not based in reality.
Yeah.
Having the conversation can actually bring down the walls of the kind of fears and build that sense of, right, we're in this together. how are we going to handle it? If
Yeah.
you can't get to that level of relationship, then you can't have that level of conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Lovely. So what let's just like summarize then into these like key points. What are the challenges that you think leaders tolerate that could be solved by doing more of what you're talking about? So leaning into the difficult conversation.
Okay, so I think for leaders, they really need to pause and think about what kind of culture am I creating? Am I creating a culture where poor quality work and behaviours are perpetuated, tolerated, because I and others are not tackling those kind of issues that are happening in the workplace? So, from that CMI research I referenced, one thing I noticed was 52% of people would rather not tackle the issue because they just don't want to have the conversation, which means that
Right.
tons of stuff just
Yeah.
carries on happening. Things like poor performance doesn't get tackled, poor behaviours don't get tackled, they don't get challenged and worked through. And that doesn't just affect the quality or quantity of work that that particular individual is responsible for, it also permeates out into their colleagues. If you're a colleague who needs something from that person and you're not getting it, then actually you're not able to do your own work. And
Mm.
then there's a kind of wider impact of that when these things aren't challenged, which is people start to become disengaged because, well, I can't get that from so and so, and nobody seems to do anything about it around here, that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And so people then start putting less effort in themselves, feeling less committed. They feel less valued because actually I can't get to do my best because something over there isn't being challenged.
Mm.
So actually, I think it makes a massive impact on culture,
Mm.
massive impact
Mm.
on results and how people feel at work.
Yeah. And I think you've mentioned this before, but just to kind of reiterate that treasury of ideas that exists within an organization that you're not even tapping into, all of that creativity, resourcefulness, innovation, ideas.
Yeah, you miss out on all of that if you don't make it easy for people to offer up their ideas, ask for what they need, and also to challenge, because if you're the leader in the room and nobody feels like they can say, I see it differently, then you're missing out on tons of potential in your people and solutions that could be sitting there untapped.
Yeah. Now, I know that you're also an expert in mediation, and that's kind of for like the really tricky end of where, some work's been done, but it's still not resolved the issue. So for leaders that are kind of going, oh, okay, I'm recognizing myself enough in this context. What's your one tip for leaders to like really start to get better in this space and to feel more resilient themselves in these kind of conversations?
I think I mentioned it earlier, and my one key tip would be curious.
Mm.
Be curious about your own natural preferences first and foremost. So notice, how am I in those situations? How do I normally behave? Whether it's meetings, one-to-ones, what am I noticing? And how do I feel about the outcome?
Mm.
What kind of culture am I contributing to? So that's very much about them. I would also say be curious about your colleagues. What do you see in them? How do they feel about these kind of conversations? How well equipped do your managers feel?
Mm.
What kind of word do you hear about how people feel about this? And then finally, next time you are in a situation where you feel like, oh, this is a bit of a lean in, just be curious. Slow down in that conversation and be curious. Ask open questions. Find out more about how the other person is seeing things and use that as a springboard to, okay, where might we head from here? Instead of seeing it as a difficulty and a challenge, be open to learning and understanding more. And maybe you'll find a really fruitful outcome that you wouldn't have thought of on your own.
Yeah. I love that, and I hear this a lot in the leader interviews about leaders always feeling like they need to have the answer to everything that they feel because they're in a leadership position and they're getting paid more to do that job that they therefore need to demonstrate their worth and they hold a lot of responsibility. And actually, I think one of the things that for me in my leader journey freed me up the most was starting to realize it wasn't just with me and it wasn't just about me and I didn't need to fix everything, and that actually when we enter into those difficult conversations walking a mile in the other person's shoes first, how are you feeling about this conversation is a great one. Like, what do you need here? like to just start to brings that other person in rather than them waiting for you to, there's an assumption maybe that they're like, oh well, they're the boss, so they're just going to tell me anyway. And it does open something different up, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes. I think it's more engaging for the other person. They feel more
Mm.
valued, they
Mm.
feel heard, all
Yes,
of which contributes to
good
how they
one.
feel about themselves in the workplace.
Yeah,
And it takes some of the load off the leader, absolutely. They don't have to carry everything. And there are so many other ideas in the workspace with other people if they're happy and able to open up that conversation and be able to say, well, actually, yeah, I don't have all the answers. Let's
yeah,
see, what else is here in the room.
yes.
I'm
Stop
open to
thinking you can read
exploring.
minds and
Absolutely.
get curious instead.
Yeah. What are
Oh,
you seeing? How are you seeing it? Those kind of questions, and just listen.
so the moral of the story is get curious and ask some good questions, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. Definitely.
So, Jane, if people want to reach out to you and if they're like, oh, do you know what? I've got some difficult conversations I could do with preparing myself well for them. How can people reach out to you? Where can they find you?
So they could contact me on my website, on the contact page there. They can book a discovery session, or they can pick up the phone to me. They'll find my phone number there and my email address as well. So I'm open to any and all of those
Great.
ways of getting in touch.
We will put your LinkedIn link connection and your website at the bottom of this podcast as well, so people can easily find you. But all
Brilliant.
that's left to say for me is I've loved this not difficult conversation. Just to say thank you very much for giving your time up and sharing your expertise. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a pleasure for me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.